to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. I'm interested to hear this one. Let's go to God and pray together as a congregation tonight. Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity to be together and to study tonight. God, we want to pause and say a special prayer for Wayne and his family and the loss of his sister. And we thank you for his family and what they mean to this area, what Wayne especially means to us here at this congregation. And we pray a blessing over them in their time of bereavement, and that you will be with them and give them peace especially. God, we thank you for his study of this lesson, of the topic that he'll present tonight, and for your word, God, that we can pause midweek and that we can gather together as brothers and sisters and study from what you would have us learn more about, so that we can learn more about your nature, learn more about what it is to serve you and to serve others, to show Christ in all that we do. God, we want to say a special prayer for the Dillon family and for Kevin as he continues to recover, and for Miss Barbara as well, and that you will be with those doctors working with her. And God, we ask a blessing on their family at this time. We also ask that you will be with those of our number here that are traveling, that are going to see friends and loved ones, that you will grant them safety and they can be back with us very soon. All of these things we are able to talk to you and ask and beseech you because of Jesus, and we ask them in his name. Amen.
For those who might not know, Matt mentioned Barbara Dillon in prayer. Word came through HCU today that she has been diagnosed with cancer. So keep her in your prayers, if you will, she and Kevin both. Okay, let's join in our song service. Oh, my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When through the woods and forests fades I wander, and hear the birds sing sweetly in the trees. When I look down from lofty mountains grandeur, and hear the brook and feel the gentle breeze, then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When pride shall come with shout of acclamation, and take me home, what joy shall fill my heart. Then I shall bow in humble adoration, and then proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee.
see if we can get all of this coordinated here. As you can tell by the subject, and I'll give them time to get to where they're going. But you can tell by the subject what we're going to talk about. You know, sometimes subjects confuse people and sort of mix them up because the speaker gives a subject and then he talks about something else. And I promise we're going to talk all the way through about the Sabbath. Before I get into the outline on here, let me say this, that in my library, and I don't even know how many books we have on this subject in our library at school, but I have at least 6 different debate books, full-length debate books, where our brethren, different brethren, debated somebody from one of the Seventh-day Adventist type churches. I mean, you know, they're not all, there's different religious groups that, besides the Jewish people, that still worship on Saturday instead of Sunday. And I've got, I don't know how many tracts of different sizes. Nearly everybody that preached at some time or another that ever wrote a tract on why we do not worship on the 7th day or Saturday. So with that said, if I can get this thing going now, is there a trick to it or something? Oh, it is going up there. Okay. The trick is here, right here. Okay, I'll finally get it all together and remember that I've got a clicker and a button up here. Okay, Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11 is there where we're seeing Moses has written what the 4th commandment is. And so this is very important. When we understand the difference between the Sabbath and the first day of the week, or rather, if we don't understand that, we misunderstand the difference between the Old Testament and the New. You know, it was not until Brother Alexander Campbell in 1810 preached a spontaneous sermon. He was given notice after he got to this meeting. The other guy that was going to speak was sick, and they asked Brother Alexander Campbell to speak. And he spoke on the difference between the Old and the New Testament. And people went away saying, scratching their head and saying, if he's right, then there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to quit doing. And others were saying, he's totally wrong and we're going to keep doing what we do. But that was sort of the seed to the beginning of the Restoration movement started by Alexander Campbell. But he pointed out in there's a difference between the Old Testament and the New. And that's why I have this statement here. If we don't understand the difference between the Sabbath and the first day of the week, we don't understand the difference between the Old and the New Testament. And there are people who would believe that we're probably still worshiping. Let's see here if I can get this thing. Okay. As I said, I'll get it all together here in a minute. And I don't understand why that thing just went on my computer. It's acting up. Apparently, it can sense something is going on. It just don't know what it is. Okay, now then. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but it's not working like it's supposed to. Okay, I've got a chart here, and I didn't draw this chart. I took this from one of those little tracts that someone had talked about the difference between the Old and the New Testament. And this is just to give you an idea that there are things on here. You got a comparison. Do any of you remember when Brother Gilbert Gibbs used to go around and teach on the tabernacle? Did any of you ever get to see him do that? he had a miniature tabernacle that he had labored on for a long, long time. And he pointed out the comparison of what took place in that tabernacle as to what took place in the New Testament church. And so this made me think of that because under the Old Covenant, it was the blood of animals in the sacrifice. Under the New Covenant, it was the blood of Christ. And it was written on stone. You know, the Ten Commandments were in the under the Old Covenant. But, you know, even the Lord prophesied, and we're going to see those passages as we go along, that it was going to be written on the heart. And so I'm not going to read every one of these. There's 15, but there's a counterpart to the in the New Testament or under the New Covenant. The New Covenant is the New Testament. The Old Covenant is the Old Testament. Covenant or Testament, either one is okay. So then let us look further, and you will see I've got some ideas here that for you to think about. The Old Covenant is a term used for the law of Moses. And we find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 14, where Paul tells us when he mentions the Old Covenant and in connection with it being the law of Moses. And we have to remember that the law of God was intensifying the gospel promise that he made to Israel, that there was coming a Messiah. And the third thing that I have here, therefore the law was not merely demands, it was also many types and promises of Christ's coming. And even in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, and then chapter 30 and verse 6, this is made clear that there was coming someone, you know, even we find it saying that there would be a prophet raised up like unto Moses. And of course, that was the prophecy about the coming of Christ. And the Old Testament explained enough about it. The Jewish people should have understood when Jesus came, but they wanted another kind of Messiah, the kind that picked up the battle gear and went into physical battle against the Romans. So that's how they missed that. The New Covenant is new in that it fulfills the demands and promises of the Old Testament. And Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 20 about this. He relates this. It fulfills then several things. Christ endured the curses of the law on our behalf. And this is in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 13. In Philippians 3 and verse 9, Jesus earned the blessings of the law on our behalf. So Jesus was the fulfillment of all of the promises that were made in the Old Testament, and so they were fulfilled under the New Covenant, not under the Old Covenant. So let us look further. It replaces the shadow with the substance. In Colossians chapter 2 and verse 17, we find it talking about the shadow there and the substance. Jesus is the high priest. Sacrifices were offered. He was the sacrifice. The tabernacle under the Old Covenant, you had, they worshiped on the Sabbath. And so we're going to see why we don't continue to do that. We believe that the Old Testament regulations governing the Sabbath, the observance are ceremonial and not moral. It's not a moral aspect of the law. As such, they are no longer in force, but have passed away along with the sacrificial system, the Levitical priesthood, and all aspects of Moses' law that prefigured Christ. Here are the reasons we hold this view. Let me say this. The people that hold to the worshiping on the Sabbath, as they call it, the seventh day, they don't have the offering of sacrifice and the annual feast. They have rejected that and said that passed away. But see, they keep holding on to the Ten Commandments. In their mind, it was given forever. Well, we're going to see that it wasn't. And so we'll have to see that very clearly. I don't know what's going on here. A whole lot of things are back this up and see where I was at. Okay. Now then, I'm sorry about this. I have to have this up here to see. I can't read that back there, even with good glasses. I can't. Ricky says he can read it, but he's not 80 years old either. So that does, I think, make a little difference. Okay, in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, Paul says explicitly, he explicitly refers to the Sabbath as a shadow of Christ. Remember, I mentioned that in just a slide before, which is no longer binding since the substance, Christ, has come. In other words, the real thing has come. It is quite clear in those verses that the weekly Sabbath is in view, or that's under discussion. So now we're going to look at those two verses Paul wrote and see what he said. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of a holy day, or the new moons, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So Paul says that these were a shadow. That's what type and antitype is about. There's something back here in the Old Testament that is revealed again in the New Testament as having been fulfilled. And so that's what Paul is talking about here, the Sabbath and the new moons and all of these holy days that they had to observe under the Old Covenant. That was a shadow of things to come. It foreshadowed the coming of Christ. Christ has come now, and so those things have been done away. He came to fulfill the law, and that's what he did. Okay, the phrase a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day refers to the annual, monthly, and weekly holy days of the Jewish calendar. And that's what 1 Chronicles chapter 23 and verse 31 says. And to offer all burnt sacrifices unto the Lord in the Sabbaths and the new moons and on the feast by numbers according to the order of command unto them continually before the Lord. So you see, he's covered that here. He's talking about the new moons and the feast. That has been done away. And we're going to see as we go further in 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse 4, Behold, I build a house in the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evening on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. See, there's the key to Israel. It was to the Jewish nation. Now we are the new Israel. We're the new, we're the new people, and we are the new Israel. Okay, 2 Chronicles 31, verse 3. He appointed also the king's portion of the substance for the burnt offerings, to wit, for the morning and evening burnt offerings and burnt offerings for the Sabbaths, and for the new moons and for the feast, as it is written in the law of the Lord. So under the old covenant, all of this had to be observed. And that's why we've got to examine this. I'm going to show you a lot of verses, probably more than you'll see in any of these other discussions, because it is so important for us to see that the Old Testament is helping us to understand that that was not forever, that they were going to pass. Okay, in Ezekiel 45, verse 17, and it shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings and a meat offering and drink offerings in the feast and in the new moons and in the Sabbaths. See, they're connecting all three of these, and we've seen two verses that have done that thus far. And in the Sabbaths and in the solemnities of the house of Israel. He shall prepare the sin offering and the meat offering and the burnt offering and the peace offering to make reconciliation for the house of Israel. And so again, this is talking about Israel. I hope I didn't. this jumped so far ahead, but it did. So there's where I want to go. Maybe I didn't open one up that I should have. I'm sorry about this. I'm having to use two different things here, and I'm only right-handed. Okay, Hosea chapter 2 and verse 11. I will also cause all her mirth to cease. This is talking about Israel now. Her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. Now, this is God's prophet Hosea saying that God is going to bring all of this to an end. If Paul were referring to special ceremonial dates as rest in the passage, why would he not have used the word Sabbath? Or why would he have used the word Sabbath? If he wasn't referring to all of this being past, why did he not use the word Sabbath? Or why did he use the word Sabbath? He has already mentioned the ceremonial dates when he spoke of festivals and new moons. And so that is important. Okay, the collection of the law transitions from the personal rights of God to the Sabbath, God's day of rest. The first three commandments are purely moral. In other words, they are directed at God. But the fourth commandment is directed at man to rest. God created 6 days for him to work and 1 day for him to rest. We find that God did that immediately after the 6 days of the creation. And so he also intended for man to rest on that seventh day. So that's why it was commanded under the old covenant. Okay, the division of the following the division of the weeks, rather, following God's example in the creation is positive. The first three commandments are universally binding to man in relationship to his respecting God. The fourth is based on the 6 days of work, and the seventh day you shall offer a new food offering to Jehovah. The 50th day, in other words, after 7 Sabbaths, that you come to the Pentecost. That's on a Sunday. You've got 7 Saturdays or Sabbaths. And then the next day, the 50th day, is Sunday. And that's the day that we find the church being established there in Acts chapter 2. Not on a Sabbath, but on the first day of the week. We find Jesus rose from the tomb on the first day of the week. We find Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 telling the Corinthian church there, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him and store as God hath prospered him. Why on the first day of the week? They were already coming together for something. Acts 20 and verse 7 tells us they're coming together to take the Lord's Supper or break the bread. So they're coming together for a purpose. And that's why he said, give on the first day of the week. But he didn't stop there. He says that there be no gatherings when I come. He didn't want to have to get out and go from house to house collecting this money. And he's saying, do it on the first day of the week. See, that was a convenient time. They were already coming. So we find all of the events that were important in the New Testament happening on the first day of the week. Now, John in the book of Revelation, there in the first chapter, talks about it being on the Lord's Day. And that's what early Christians, we can find that documented in writing after writing after writing, that they referred to the first day of the week as the Lord's Day. And so John said he was in spirit on the Lord's Day. He couldn't be with those brethren back over there in Ephesus. He could see across the water, and in the distance he could see the mainland from Patmos, but he couldn't be with them. He was in exile. And so he was in the spirit, he says. And that's when God gave him the revelation that we have as the last book of the New Testament. Okay, I'm wondering if I'm just 1 or 2 slides behind. Sorry about that. Okay, some of you will recognize that from the movie, The Ten Commandments. That was Charlton Heston posing or playing as Moses, holding up one of the tables of stone that represented the law as it was given, carved with the fingers of God in the stone, and Moses brought it down the mountain. So the Ten Commandments then are distinct from Old Testament law. And we're going to see this as we move on here. The fourth is based on 6 days of work, and the seventh as a day of rest. It was a perpetual obligation to Israel to remember the seventh day and its significance. To hallow the Sabbath is to set it apart from any other day as a sacred day of rest. For 6 days thou shalt labor and do thy work. Then you shall remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. The seventh day then was for rest, as we look at those passages, verses 8 and 9 of Exodus chapter 20. Let's see, I think I went one too far. Okay, the number 7 has acquired a typical sacredness. When we were studying about the book of Revelation in our summer, before summer, we took about a year and a half on the book of Revelation. But we talked about numbers and the significance, but 7 was the holy number because it represented perfection and completeness. And so 7 days, and the 6 days you work, and the seventh day is for rest. Rest and dedication to God are the properties that are assigned to the Sabbath. A reason is given for the observance of the fourth commandment. It refers to the original division of time into 6 days of work and the seventh day to rest. Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. God not only rested from 6 days of creative labor, but blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11. So then, this commandment raises a critical question for the New Testament church. How do Christians respond to the Sabbath day? Well, we've got a whole bunch of groups that just down the road, down Cox Creek, about a mile, I'd say, right at a mile, there's a group that meets on the side of a hill down there in our church building that meet on Saturday. They believe, and they're Seventh-day Adventists, they believe that's the day that they're supposed to worship. And they're the ones that deny that that was ever changed. Okay, let us look further. Okay, those who advocate the Sabbath as the correct day of worship to God claim the Ten Commandments are everlasting and that they were binding. Notice this, before Moses received them at Sinai. Now, in those debate books that I was telling you about, nearly every one of the Adventist preachers that was debating, they made some statement similar to this right here, that the commandments are everlasting and that they were binding before Moses received them. Okay, let us go on down to the bottom there to Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 13 and 14, and let us see I don't know why that, did I pass all of that up? Maybe I should have let Wayne back there do the clicking on this. Wayne, can I hand it to you? Yeah, I want the one that's got Nehemiah's verse on it. Okay, you got it there? Okay, the passage starts, you came down on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven. This is talking about God. This is Nehemiah talking to God. Now, you came down on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them righteous judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments. You made known, this is key, you made known to them your holy Sabbath. See, our Adventist friends claim that it was there even before it was given as one of the 10 Commandments. Well, see, this Nehemiah says different. He says here that God made known to them about the Sabbath and commanded them commandments, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses your servant. That was Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. So it's clear. It's as plain as the nose on her face that Nehemiah said God made known to them about the Sabbath. They didn't know about it back in Egypt. Abraham didn't know about it. Adam and Eve didn't know about it. Maybe they knew that God stopped after the sixth day and didn't create anymore, but there is no indication that anybody took that seventh day as a day to worship God. But you see, after the 10 Commandments were given, a different story happens. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Well, I thought I moved that. Okay, is this Colossians? Back up, yeah, there you go. Okay, Colossians chapter 2, verses 14 through 17. And I have worn this passage here out to people, trying to show them that the Old Testament was nailed to the cross and that we're under a new covenant. Even the Old Testament foretold of its being set aside and a new being given. Jeremiah 31:31 and following, you find that fulfillment in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8 and following, and it quotes almost word for word what Jeremiah said about it was going to be replaced. But the Hebrew writer is quoting it to say it's now been fulfilled. And then he makes another statement at the end of that he said a new covenant, it made the first covenant old. When you start talking about, I've got a new car, that means if you've got any more, they're older. And that's just logic. And that's what the writer was saying there. Other words, he was trying to say that God was saying this first covenant is going to become old, and there's going to be a new, and also the Hebrew writer says that it was better. Okay, so here's what Colossians 2, verses 14 through 17 says. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and has taken it out of the way. You see, that old covenant has been taken out of the way now. And taking it out of the way, nailing it to the cross, having stripped rulers and authority, he made a show of them publicly, triumphing over them in it. Therefore, let no one judge you in food, or in drink, or in respect of a feast, or the new moon, or the Sabbaths, for these are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. And of course, we know that there in Ephesians chapter 1, that Paul plainly says that the church and the body is the church. And so the body of Christ is the church. He's talking about something that came about under the new. Okay, let us go to the next slide. This should be Jeremiah 31:31. And here we'll see what I've just mentioned. Behold, the day comes, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So he's plainly talking about that when he gave the law there, the 10 Commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai, and then the laws that followed, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. Okay, let's go to the next one. Should be Jeremiah 31, verse 33. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. Remember, I showed you under the old covenant, it was written in stone. Now he's going to give a law that will be in their hearts, and it'll be in the flesh, not in stone. And he goes on to say, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God. In other words, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. In other words, under God's new Israel, we become a part of that when we're baptized into Christ. In other words, he's talking about Christians. He's not talking about everybody in the whole world. He's talking about Christians. And that's why you don't have to teach them anymore to know the Lord, because they know the Lord. They're his children. Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Okay, the next slide. We're going to Hebrews chapter 8 now, beginning with verse 8, and you'll see that the old Jeremiah 31 was foretelling its coming, and now the Hebrew writer is quoting this to say it's here. Okay, for finding fault with them, he saith, Behold, the day come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. Okay, next slide. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Now, here's that extra verse I said that the Hebrew writer put explaining why the old was done away. In that he saith, A new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. So then, when you start talking about something new and it's replacing something you already have, well, he's saying here that the old is ready to be set aside. Well, that's what God did with the old covenant. And the Hebrew writer has quoted this to give us an idea of why there was a new covenant made. Now, Hebrews 8 and verse 6, But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator, he's talking about Christ, of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. Remember, earlier I said that the Hebrew writer talks about the new covenant being a better covenant. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 24. And to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Now Abel offered a sacrifice, and we learned that it was more excellent than that of his brother Cain. And we also learned from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, that even though he's dead, he still speaks to us. In other words, his example is still there for us to learn from. But we learn now that Jesus, and Hebrew writer several times in his writing, lets us know that Christ is the mediator of the new covenant. He says that in various ways, but it all means the same thing. But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. And that, brothers and sisters, is why the Sabbath, and all of those other things connected with the Sabbath were set aside because they were part of that older law that it was prophesied even by the old law. It was going to be set aside, and a new would be established in its place. There's no truth more plainly taught in the Scriptures than the fact that the Sinai law was insufficient and that it was replaced by a new and better law, the law of Christ, a new and better covenant. So that, I think we can all understand that from the Scriptures. And I just showed this just to give you something else to look at there for a second or two. But this is an old manuscript of Isaiah, this particular one, and it's over 2,000 years old. Okay, now, what does that mean to us? Under the new covenant, which is for Jews and Gentiles, how many nations was the old law given to? Just one, wasn't it? To the Jews. And that's why there was a need for, if God was going to fulfill that promise that he made to Abraham that all nations would be blessed through his seed, then he had to change that law that he gave there at Sinai, and it had to be broadened so that it would be not just for Jews, but for everybody that wanted to obey the Lord and would obey the Lord. Okay, so under the new covenant, which is for the Jews and Gentiles, we have new rules and practices. The law of Moses was for the nation of the Jews only, and that's what I've just got us to understand. Under the new covenant, we follow the rules and practices that were given for the new Israel, and we're part of the new Israel, brothers and sisters. And that was just a symbolic word meaning the Christians, and that's what we are. We're like a new Israel. God has given us a new covenant that was for everybody that was willing to obey. Under the old covenant, it was for the Jews. But let me say this. The old covenant was given to the Jews to help prepare the world for the coming of the Messiah. It was through the Jews that they was going to come, that the Messiah would come, and that was Jesus, we know. But you see, God was preparing Israel with this old covenant to try to stay on track, and through that, he's going to bring that Messiah. And that's how all nations would be blessed through the seed of Abraham. There in Matthew chapter 1, we learned that Christ descended through the seed of Abraham. You can trace his genealogy all the way back to Abraham. And you can trace it further than that in Luke, but you can trace it back to Abraham. And God had promised Abraham that through his seed all nations would be blessed. Well, if all nations are going to be blessed, that's going to include more than just the Jews. And that's why the Sabbath was given under the old covenant to help the Jews to respect, to worship God, to set aside a time that was holy. But that was set aside itself when Christ was nailed to the cross, as we shall see. Okay, now then, this is some examples that I gave to you earlier. The church broke the Lord's Supper, or the bread, on the first day of the week, Acts 20 and 7. The Corinthian church was coming together on the first day of the week for something special. Therefore, they were to give on the first day of the week. Well, Acts 20 and 7 says they're coming together to break bread, or we understand that to be the Lord's Supper. Well, if they're coming together for that, then the giving, it makes sense that they would give. That's a convenient time to give. And John refers to the special day as the Lord's Day, Revelation chapter 1, verse 10. We have three references from the New Testament that the Christian's day of worship was the first day of the week, or the Lord's Day, as it was called by inspired men. So then, that's what we understand, brothers and sisters. We don't find the church the New Testament church coming together on the Sabbath. You might say, well, Paul went on the Sabbath and worshiped. Remember, Paul was trying to convert those Jewish people. He was trying to tell them the Messiah has already come. Jesus has come to save the world. And so, him being a Jew, he didn't want to do anything to spoil his relationship any more than it was. When he began to teach the new covenant and Christ came, a lot of Jews broke with him. But you know, some of them believed him too. And some became Christians, New Testament Christians. So that's why Paul would go into the synagogues on Sabbath, because that's when those people were coming together to worship. And what better time to teach them than when they were coming together as a group. Okay, let's go to the next slide, and I guess our time will be up. We follow the early church example and worship on the first day of the week when our Lord was raised, not the day that God set as a sign to the ancient nation of Israel. So Jesus was raised. That was a sign to the whole world that God was giving us. Christ had already ended the old covenant technically when it was nailed to the cross with him, and God now has made another special day. And it was on that first day of the week that Christ came forth from the grave. First day of the week is the day God confirmed as our day of worship when he brought forth his Son from the sealed tomb as our risen Savior, priest and king. The church was established on the first day of the week. That's Acts chapter 2. And this was in accordance to Leviticus chapter 23, verses 15 through 16. And this is what that says. And you shall count to you from the next day after the Sabbath, that would be the seventh Sabbath, if you go back and read the full context, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Let's go to the next slide there. Okay, to the next day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days, and you shall offer a new food offering to Jehovah. The 50th day, or Pentecost, and that's literally what Penti means 50, and Costa there has to do with the days. So the Pentecost was the 50th day, was the first day of the week. The 50th day is the first day of the week. See, 7 times 7, you remember your mathematics, is 49. And then the next day after that makes 50. And that's your Pentecost, and that was the first day of the week. The most important event in the New Testament, were connected to the first day of the week. We therefore conclude from these foregoing passages that the Sabbath was replaced by the first day of the week. Now we could go on and talk about Constantine. People say, oh, he's the one that ended the Sabbath and started the first day of the week. Constantine didn't come along for 300 years after the New Testament was written. And we plainly see the church was established on the first day of the week. We find Acts 20 and 7, they were coming together to break bread on the first day of the week. And then Paul is telling them, while they're coming together on the first day of the week, to give. So we've got passages in the New Testament that let us know that it was on the first day of the week and not the 7th day of the week that the New Testament church was meeting. And so, is the Sabbath still binding on us today? No. It ought to be enough. When we look at Nehemiah says, you know, that it was first given, the Sabbath was given there to Moses and the children of Israel. It was given at Sinai, and that it's going to end. You know, it's not one of those things that's going to be forever. The Sabbath day being important is going to come to an end. And we found, we looked at several passages tonight that plainly showed this. And then we looked at Jeremiah 31:31, where it prophesied the coming of a new covenant and that the old covenant would be set aside. And then the Hebrew writer has picked this up and quoted it and shown us in chapter 8 of Hebrews, beginning with verse 8, that that was done, that was completed. And he even explains when the Lord, I'm paraphrasing now, when the Lord said the old covenant or the new covenant, going to establish a new, that automatically made the one in existence the old covenant. And so the Hebrew writer then helps us to understand, as well as other passages, that the Sabbath is not the day to worship. Any questions? You got about 5 seconds. I'm just kidding. Any questions or comments? Okay, do I wait till they come back in? I can just go ahead and do the invitation. There may be someone here this evening that feels that there's something standing between you and your Lord that could keep you from going to heaven. And if that be the case, as I look out over the audience, I don't see anyone that I know is not a member of the church. But even we as members of the church, sometimes we can have things that are not right between us and God. And if that be the case, if you're one of those people, this is the time that you can make it right. We go back to what James said in chapter 5 and verse 16. Confess your faults one to another, pray one for another, that you may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And so prayers will be said on your behalf, and you can pray, and you can be restored. So if there's someone here, when the invitation song is sung, that needs to make things right between you and God, this would be the time to do it. Now, we all saw how quick Brother Alvin Austin passed away. Taught Vacation Bible School the night before he died the next day. That's pretty quick. I mean, everybody thought he was okay. 2 days before that, he sang at Brenda's aunt's funeral. Did a good job on Beulah land. What I'm trying to say, brothers and sisters, the Lord can call us real quick. And so if there's anything in your life that you think might be a question, might keep you out of heaven, now's the time to take care of it. Not for me, not for anybody else in here, but for your own soul's sake. So whatever if you have a need, let it be known as we stand and sing. Please come. Listen, Mac. You know how it is. Thank you, sister.